There is a quote that says, "You can't improve what you don't measure." And your New Year's resolutions, your business or your career goals for this year are no different. I'm Michael, also known as KES, and this video was inspired by a viewer on last week's video about my New Year's resolutions on what are some best practices or ways in which I measure or track my goals, and how can you guys do that too? In keeping everything simple, let's jump right into some quick tips on how to track and measure your goals. So before you can actually track something, you have to know what it is that you are trying to track to begin with. Is it a goal? Is it a metric? Is it a certain measurement? So that's something that you have to define beforehand, which is why this first piece isn't actually a tip, it's all about goal structure. Understanding your goal structure is super important. For myself, I simplify it into three main components. The first component is outcomes, which are generally future looking. And these are things that may not always actually be in your control, which would be things like stretch goals, but sometimes you can have input outcomes that you want to create, and those are in your control, but they are still future looking. And then we have actions, and these are the things that you're going to do daily, or the actions you will take that are going to slowly move that needle of progress closer and closer towards that future looking outcome or that future looking goal that you have. And the final component we have is tracking, which is auditing or reviewing your past efforts and using that to judge how you need to improve or adjust the approach you're currently taking while trying to reach your goals. Which leads me to the acronym, which I call OAT. So we have future for outcomes, we have the present in actions, and then we have the past in tracking. Now that the goal setting structure is in place, because without a solid foundation, you're gonna have a hard time really utilizing more of these tips, we can now move on to the measuring and tracking actionable tips that you can use today. First, what works for someone else may not actually work for you, and that's okay. This is a pretty common piece of advice in the whole personal development space, but it's actually super important to understand why it matters. You have to know the type of person that you are. Are you very analytical? Are you a little bit more chaotic and disorganized? Do you like having a lot of data coming at you? Or is a quick visual something that is better for you? These are important things that you have to know about yourself. What makes this so important is that if you're using a system that you borrowed from someone else or that you found online and you dread using it, or there's too much friction between actively sitting down and working on it, then it may just be that that system is not best suited for you. Understanding your personality, understanding what helps you operate at your best is going to be super important in finding a system that works for you in tracking and measuring your goals. And I like to think back to time in school or time in university, because there can be good indicators there on what works well for you. Was a planner something that helped you be super successful in class? Were constant reminders or alarms in your phone something that you used to help you be successful? Was it really just a to-do list that you checked off throughout the day? It's these kind of ideas, finding out what works for you and what is easiest for you to implement. And that's gonna help you find a system that you can really stick to. And speaking of finding what works best for you, that leads us on to tip number 2. When working with your system, you want to keep it as simple as it can be and only as complex as it needs to be. Let me explain. Why you want to keep your system as simple as possible is that it's going to help reduce friction between you actively using your system and forgetting to write down your goals or forgetting to write down your progress, because if you have less friction and it's a very simple and easy system that you can use consistently, that's going to make it better for you. And when I say keep it as complex as it needs to be, that just means figuring out what are the key data points that you need, what are the key things that you really want to measure, what key actions are you taking that again are moving that needle of progress forward. And maybe you only need a couple of them, maybe you just need one, but it really comes down to, again, keeping it as complex as it needs to be useful for you. Now, an easy example that I can use for this is my goal of reading a book every single month. So that is about, on average, 10 pages a day, because the books I tend to read are about 200, 300 pages. Pretty short and simple, but how do I track that? Well, here's my way of doing that. So I am currently reading The $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. Good book, highly recommend. So you see this little bookmark up here? For those of you who can see it on the camera and recognize it, this is a Yu-Gi-Oh card, because I felt like it. Something simple, quirky, and pretty fun. How this system works for me of tracking my progress is very, very simple. Most days in the morning, the card is backwards facing. And so when I read off my 10 pages or a chapter, then that's when I activate my trap card and flip it around. That's it. And then at the end of the day, right before I head to bed, I will flip the card back around to let me know, hey, now you are ready to go the next day. And once that card has been flipped, you know that you have read your pages for that day. Another example of my goal setting and tracking it is my workouts. So I want to, again, work out 3 to 4 times a week and do so for 45 minutes. And I want to reach a certain weight range by the end of the year. So that's exactly what I put on my calendar. I have one simple normal calendar that's on my wall, and it has 2 pieces of information on there. My daily weigh-ins, so I can check my weekly average, and a little X that lets me know if I worked out that day or not. Super simple. And for me, these are, again, keeping my tracking simple, visual, because I like having those visual reminders, and easy. There's very little friction. Actually, there's pretty much no friction at all to me tracking or being able to track my progress, and that I've actually taken the actions that I need to do every single day, or most days. And so comment below, what's been the hardest goal for you to track so far this year already? Or what was the hardest goal for you to track last year? I'd love to know what you guys have been working on. Now that we have the data, now that we have our means or our methods of tracking, that moves us on to the next tip, which is doing regular audits or reviews of the information you have. So once again, what doesn't get measured doesn't get improved. This does mean that just having the data or having your means of tracking is only half the process. You need to set aside time or set aside these points in which you're gonna actively sit down and review or go over the progress that you've made so far and the notes that you have. This will help you adjust your attempts or your approach that much easier, as well as give you these little checkpoints to really see how well you've been progressing and know if you're staying right on track. And so again, using my workouts as an example, because my system so far is just my weights, and if I have or have not worked out that day, I take that information, I check the averages of my weights, and I put this information into Notion, as well as using the information from my workouts themselves, so that way I have all my data compiled that I need. And so it goes from, again, having that visual to then auditing and reviewing it and seeing what steps I need to take to continue to improve and continue to reach my goals. Consider tracking your goals or tracking your progress as checkpoints, like in a video game. These checkpoints save your progress, so that way you can look back to it when necessary and refer to it. You can use it to load up different pieces of information, and they help you as you move throughout the game, leveling up constantly, taking on quests, and eventually beating the boss. When I say beating the boss, I don't mean that literally. I know I talk about leadership and management a lot on this channel, but please don't fight your boss. Be sure you check out last week's video, which was all about my goals for 2023 in both my career and in my life. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I do hope that these little tips are gonna help you find a system of tracking your goals that's gonna be easy and efficient for you. Keeping everything simple. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.